It's 2015 and I'm on a plane to Berlin to the very first Congress of the European Network Academy of Neurology. And beside me on the plane is my friend Barry. Barry, like me, also has cervical dystonia. And he's also like me, from a body that represents people who have dystonia. Barry's dystonia, like mine, also means that his head leans a little to the right. In the window seat of the plane is a woman who is obviously a nervous flyer. She's fanning herself and she's clutching at that paper bag they give you to be sick into. So Barry and I try to give her as much space as we can, but it's not that easy when you're crammed into a Ryanair flight. We hit some turbulence and she's getting a little bit distressed now. She's mumbling to herself, she's rocking back and forth, and Barry and I are trying to look away, but again, because of the dystonia, we feel we're not giving her the space we'd like to. Anyway, we land safely, and that, we think, is that until the following morning when we're on our way to the Congress and we hop on the shuttle bus outside the hotel. And who's on the bus but the lady from the plane? And she takes one look at us and she says, "Oh, it's you two weirdos from the plane." And that was my first meeting with Julie. Right, so I'm on a plane. I'm doing everything you're supposed to do. I'm doing my deep breathing. I'm imagining I'm a bird flying through the sky. I've even kicked off my shoes and I'm clenching my feet like Bruce Willis does in that movie, Die Hard. I'm doing all right, I'm coping until we hit some turbulence. And then suddenly I'm jolted up and my eyes open and I see these two bozos next to me, leaning in, staring at me. I mean, how rude is that? So we're back on the shuttle bus, and Julie, I can see her mind working in overtime. She's putting two and two together and she's figuring, all right, these two people are heading to the EAN. Maybe they have a neurological condition, and she thinks this is hilarious. And she's turning around, she's telling everybody on the shuttle bus about her mistake. It turns out that the two on the plane had dystonia, which is a neurological condition affecting the head and neck. They weren't being rude at all. In fact, I was the one that was rude. There was nothing wrong with their behavior whatsoever. And it turns out that Julie is from a body representing people who have Huntington's disease, which I'd heard of, but I really didn't know very much about. Now, I had never heard of dystonia before. That seems kind of strange to me, because while it's classified as a rare disease, it's actually the third most common movement disorder. And it's thought to affect something like 500,000 people across Europe. And it affects different parts of the body, or it can affect all over. Catherine and Barry have cervical dystonia affecting the head and neck. So Julie is from a family affected by Huntington's, and we kept bumping into each other at the EAN, you know, in the talks, in the queues for lunch. And because we were both dealing with a relatively new diagnosis, 3 years for Catherine, and my family had been dealing with Huntington's for about 4 years. So we had a lot to talk about. There was a lot of overlap in our experiences, and we were anxious to talk to one another. Whenever I'd let you get a word in edgeways, whenever you would let me get a word in edgeways. Sorry, I'm a blabbermouth. When you come from a family affected by Huntington's, you learn not to be shy. The stories I could tell you about members of my family doing seemingly crazy things in public. I don't think anything phases me anymore, but I should probably give those of you who need it an overview of the disease. So, right, Huntington's is a hereditary disease passed down through the generations. If a parent has the disease, there's a 50% chance a child will have it too. It's all down to a faulty gene, which results in damage to the brain over time. It can affect your movement, well, it does affect your movement, your cognitive ability and your emotional health. So just about everything. It is thought to affect between 5 and 10 people in every 100,000. Symptoms typically show up between the ages of 35 to 55, and you can expect to live for 15 to 20 years from symptom onset. But it will get you in the end. Maybe not the disease itself, but complications that arise as a result of it. Typically pneumonia, heart failure, choking, all the cheery stuff. Julie told me that the Huntington's in her family was inherited through her father. His father had been orphaned during the war and ended up being adopted by a Scottish family. And with Julie, the genetic connection wasn't made for a long time. It took them a long time to get a diagnosis. She was in her early teens when she was having to cope with the changes that she saw in her dad. Oh my God, that time. I tell people it was like a malevolent force had taken over my dad's body. He became forgetful, irritable, aggressive if you challenged him about things. And because the genetic connection wasn't made for so long, it took a while to be diagnosed. But when we got the diagnosis, it was a relief. It was only later when I did some more reading about Huntington's that I suppose the shadow of Huntington's really came into our home. Like I learned about people who had been locked up in mental institutions, people who had been given electric shock therapy. The shame of Huntington's finally hit home. And then you begin to wonder, could I have the gene? 50% chance. Sometimes 50% feels like good odds. Sometimes it's devastating. So we did what a lot of Huntington's patients and their families do. We started to look at our priorities. And we decided that we got the diagnosis just before Christmas. We were going to have this giant family Christmas so we could spend significant times together. So my family, my father's sisters and their families all crowded into a tiny little council house in Glasgow. Now, one of my dad's fixations, you might know Huntington's patients often have compulsive behaviours or obsessions. Well, with my dad, it was food hygiene. So a carrot would be washed for 10 minutes and peeled to its core before he'd eat it. So there's my mother in our tiny little kitchen. She's trying to stuff a turkey. And every time she turns around, my dad's grabbed the turkey and he's running it under the tap. Meanwhile, Auntie Jenny is in the sitting room. She's having a wee cry. Upstairs, Auntie May has locked herself in the bathroom because she can't remember how to turn a key. So it all ended with my twin brother Alistair having to scale up the back wall, climbing through the bathroom window and let my auntie out. The day ended with my mother taking her dinner out to the back garden because she said, I would rather eat my turkey in the snow, we actually had snow that year, than spend another minute with you lot. But how did I get onto that? Sorry, diagnosis. So my family bounced around a lot between doctors until we got a diagnosis. But my God, Catherine, you really had to wait, didn't you? I did. 5 years. 5 long years. It is not unusual for a dystonia patient to have a long time to wait for a diagnosis. 2 to 5 years is actually pretty typical, but I do know people who've had to wait longer. I know for you, Julie, it was more complicated, but for me, getting a diagnosis was like a light going on in a dark room. I can only imagine because you were in a really bad way by the time you got your diagnosis, weren't you? And you were like this super fit, like career girl, super mum before symptoms hit, weren't you? Sorry, you go on, you tell everybody all about it. Well, I don't know about super anything, but I was really into fitness. I was working as a project manager for a large construction company. And I had 3 teenagers at home, 3 boys, and I was a competitive runner. So I had actually done 9 marathons by that time and countless half marathons. Anyway, I was training one Saturday morning with a friend of mine, and it was hot, well, hot for Ireland, 23 degrees, and I felt this sudden pain in my neck. It was a sort of like a clenching, but quite sharp. And because I'm used to pushing through and I didn't want to wimp out in front of my training partner, I just kept on running. So by evening, I'm in bed with a hot water bottle and I'm throwing back the strongest painkillers I can find in the house. By the following Monday, my head is sort of jerking to the right and there's a pain in my shoulder. So I ring my GP, I make an appointment for the following day. By the time I get to the GP, I'm thinking I've probably pulled a muscle, something very simple like that. My GP agrees with me. She gives me stronger painkillers. She says, come back in 2 weeks if things haven't improved. 2 weeks later, my head is almost frozen in this leaning position and I have a tremor that comes and goes. Actually, let's do a little experiment, just to give you a sense of what it felt like. So if you take your hands and put them on the side of your head, just imagine somebody is holding your head and they are pushing your head to one side as far as it'll go. And now I want you to twist your head so that your ear is beginning to come down towards your shoulder. Add in a little tremor. And to stop the tremor, you're lifting up your shoulder. So imagine trying to sustain a day's work. Imagine trying to drive a car. Imagine trying to drink a glass of water. You can relax. So that's what it was like for me all day, every day. It was exhausting. The only relief I got was when I slept. My GP is very shocked when she sees me 2 weeks later, and the round of visits to physiotherapists and experts and consultants and psychologists begin. Now for me, things got bad very, very quickly, and my walk began to get affected, and then they got better, and then they got worse again. And this is what can happen with dystonia. Things can change, or symptoms can be very subtle, or they can present similar to other conditions, such as Parkinson's. And so all of this combined makes it very, very difficult to diagnose. Now, in my case, my GP was beginning to think maybe stress was a factor or some psychological disorder. And I found this very difficult because I felt like I knew my own body, so I felt like I wasn't being listened to. Eventually, I got lucky and I had a referral to a movement disorder specialist who took one look at me and said, "You have dystonia." And I promptly burst into tears not because I was upset, but because finally, after 5 years, I knew what was happening. Strap yourselves in because there's going to be more tears. Right, it's 2 years later and we're back for the third EAN, this time in lovely Amsterdam. And we've stayed in touch over the years and we've arranged to stay in the same hotel. Now I get a wee bit of a shock when I see Catherine in the lobby. Her tremor is a lot worse and her head looks like it's even pulled more to one side. But I don't say anything because I don't want to make her feel self-conscious. So I give her a big hug and I say something like, "Oh my God, you look terrible." Or words to that effect is how she greeted me. She'd be the world's worst poker player. But I was in a bad way. My dystonia was very triggered. I had made the mistake of going back to work full time. I had 2 boys at home doing exams. My husband was away traveling a lot and it all resulted in this very bad remission in symptoms. Now, I had been getting my botulinum injections. You probably know botulinum is often used to treat certain types of dystonia. Well, I'd been getting my injections every 3 to 4 months and it did help, but it wasn't getting me through this remission. And my neurologist was beginning to talk about DBS as a possible treatment route. You probably know DBS, deep brain stimulation, is where they effectively open your skull and put wires in that connect to different parts of the brain associated with movement. I was very scared, not because I didn't think DBS could work. I know it can. I have a friend, Paula, who is in my dystonia support group, and Paula had got to a stage where she couldn't walk. She couldn't hold anything in her hands. She was in terrible pain. She underwent DBS and within months she was walking, and she's now thinking about starting a family. so I know it can work. It's just, I think I'd always found DBS comforting to know that it was there in the background. If things got really bad for me, it was an option. But I'm a bit shocked to find myself at this juncture already. And I've always had such a strong connection with my body. Like, my mother used to say she would rather rear 10 boys all over again than rear me, because I was always running and climbing and dancing. I think I'm not really ready to accept that my options have run out. Right. So while Catherine is dealing with this setback in her symptoms, my life has fallen apart again, because my lovely brother Alistair, my twin, my soulmate, has been diagnosed with early stages HD. So Alistair noticed he was having difficulty concentrating. Alistair's a hairdresser. He owns a salon not far from our house. And he noticed that he was having problems remembering how people like their cuts. And one time he went in and he opened up shop on a Sunday. And being the walking hero that he is, Alistair decided to immediately start the genetic testing process. He said, I couldn't live with myself if I gave Mrs. Anderson a short back and sides instead of a perm. Alistair is still working. I don't think he does cuts anymore, and I know the rest of the staff still keep an eye on him. Alistair and I live in a family home. You see, this is what happens when you grow up in a Huntington's family. You end up caring across the generations. We both cared for my dad when he had Huntington's, and then my mum got cancer, we cared for her, and now Alistair needs the care. Huntington's is a thief. Not only does it steal your loved ones, but it steals your youth as well. Alistair and I missed out on so many nights out, holidays. We both had to go straight to work from school so we could provide for ourselves. I only put myself through college after my dad died. And now it's starting all over again. But at least this time I know what's going on with Alistair. I know what's behind his behaviour. I actually want to say his misbehaviour. Alistair is, he's exhibiting more impulsive behaviour than previously, which can be very typical with HD patients. He has gone a bit wild on his credit card a few times, and he's gone a bit crazy on dating sites. I won't go into details, but he's put himself in precarious situations a few times. And it's very hard for me because I'm walking a fine line. I don't want to smother him. Most of the time he's fine, he's Alistair. And he gets very low when I challenge him about his behaviour. I mean really low. And it's hard to know if the HD is causing his depression or if Alistair is depressed because he can see his HD is progressing. And my dad had a very hard time with low mood. So I'm worried Alistair is going to go through the same journey. And because he's impulsive, well, let's just say there's some mornings I'm relieved to see him sitting at the kitchen table. So Alistair doesn't have any major physical symptoms yet. His coordination's a bit off, and he's a bit ticky. Like his jaw ticks a little bit, and he clears his throat a lot, but he doesn't have any major chorea yet. My dad, oh my God, my dad was like a puppet on his strings. The arms were constantly going. And then in his later years, he actually had dystonia. His fists were clenched and his feet would kick out a lot. But before that, with the chorea, we used to call him the raver. We used to say, Dad, are you going to a rave? Because techno was quite big at the time. But actually, you were a big techno girl, weren't you, Catherine? I was. I was. Any excuse to get out and dance. Actually, you could say techno saved my life. Never thought that's something I'd end up saying, but there you go. Dystonia brings you to strange places. It was during the remission in my symptoms, and I was in a very bad place. I had stopped going out. My family were getting very worried about me. I spent most of my time in bed. There's no describing the pain. It racks your body. The spasms were like electrical impulses, and then to alleviate them I was twisting myself, putting pressure on other parts of the body. Anyway, I'm at home and I'm in bed, and my eldest son Jack is next door in his bedroom, and he's playing some music, and he puts on that old 90s hit, Pump Up the Jam. You pump up the jam, pump it up till your feet are stomping. Anyway, I'm lying there and I'm listening to the music, and I'm listening to it as if I haven't heard it before. Like, I'm really listening to it. And then after a while I notice my head is bobbing. And that might not sound like a big deal, but my head hasn't bobbed in 2 years. And I start doing some experiments over the next few months, and I discover that when I'm dancing, I can do movements that I can't ordinarily do. And then somebody in my dystonia support groups says that there's a therapist who's using dance with dystonia patients. So I start working with her, and within a few months, my shoulders started to come down a little bit. And I begin to make movements in every session that are new to me. I don't know why, but for some reason, dance seems to be a pathway that's opened up for my recovery. And in my house, it's laughter. My dad used to wear a t-shirt that says, "Huntington's gives me extra ice cream and hugs." We try to laugh in the face of this bloody awful disease. My dad and my auntie are dead. Alistair and 2 of my cousins are currently grappling with the disease. And we lost my lovely cousin, Rob, aged 39, because Rob chose to end his own life because of Huntington's. So 6 of us so far. Love and laughter. That's how we get through. And you have a lot of love in your life at the moment, don't you? I do. I met Ben through the Huntington support group. Ben's mum had HD, so he gets it. He just gets it. And he is a great support with Alistair. Ben would like me to consider starting a family with him, but I'm saying no, because I'm not willing to start the genetic testing process. You're probably wondering about that. I haven't been tested. I just don't have the courage to go into a room and be handed a piece of paper that might affect my ability to get up in the morning or not. And I'm not alone. Most adult children with Huntington's choose not to be tested. But you have a lot of love in your life too, don't you, Catherine? I do. My husband and my kids are a wonderful support, but also my dystonia support group. I think the thing I've learned from my group is that I'm not alone. And dystonia has meant that I've made some changes in my life, but it doesn't define me. I'm surviving and I'm thriving. Right, we should probably finish up. Any final words? Absolutely. We need more awareness so we can have earlier diagnosis, and also around mental health. Structures need to be put in place before a patient with Huntington's gets into a crisis situation, and also around training. The challenges around mental health need to be built in right from the start. And I would like to say that I have similar issues. Despite its prevalence, there is still a lack of awareness and understanding around dystonia in the medical community, and this is leading to delays in diagnosis. It's impacting care, and it increases the isolation and the stigma that dystonia patients feel. So awareness, awareness, awareness. And awareness would help with bloody idiots like me not recognizing the disorder, like that time on the plane to Berlin. Exactly, it would help with idiots like you. Also, one final thing, around the multidisciplinary, wouldn't it be incredible if we had more dialogue around different approaches, so that there was a deeper understanding of different approaches for different patients? Right, you love to have the final word. Any final words? Oh yes, big words. Take nothing for granted. You've no idea what's ahead of you. Huntington's has made my journey very narrow. A trip away from the house is a big treat, but it has brought me here to you, and you're the ones that are going to make a difference. So make a difference.